This is the BBC.
Dear brothers and sisters, all are welcome here at the Confessions podcast, whether saint or sinner.
It's a rock and roll Christmas.
That is Christmas, is it? It's a bit belly,
loosely,
isn't it?
It's just got a thing on it, but it's...
You could jive to that.
In Confessions Land, every day is like Christmas because we're just giving.
Yeah,
give,
that's true.
give. Anyways, it feel like spring to you? I think it feels like spring to me because we record this podcast after the show on Thursday. If you look out the window there, it actually looks like the middle of the afternoon.
It does, yeah. It feels almost like it's 10 to 3 in the afternoon. That's amazing.
How is that?
Yeah.
Anyway, on the podcast today, we're going to have all your favourite extra bits that you don't get during the live show, the X-rated confessions, the best of the people's verdicts, more of your desperate grabs for out-of-date Radio 2 merchandise, our most successful feature. Another confession from the crypt this week featuring, as we mentioned, a gorilla and a fridge. Thank you very much. And a lot of faffing about, which is probably worth the licence fee alone. Everybody agrees. People stop me in the street and they say, the faffing about, I'm so glad I pay the licence fee for that. And in fact, then they give me money.
They do.
They then give me a whole
I would gladly
stack of money.
Give my house to be able to listen to one more podcast.
Don't just charge us that small amount for the licence fee. Yes, here, have everything I've ever earned. Anyway, there's the main event, of course. Another shameful batch of confessions, including Kiri's tale, Cornflake Girl, Shane's story, Groove is in the Art, and Amanda's confession, Holy Commotion. But we're going to start with this one, the number of the fleeced.
Simon Mayo's Confessions podcast. Please be seated.
I mean, some people just draw attention to themselves as soon as they walk in. It's confession time. Nigel walked straight in and spilt water over our electrical console. So who knows, if we fizz and pop off the air, then that might be curtains.
We could be nicely simmered. Sorry about that. I thought Matt was going to go up in a puff of blue smoke for a minute, but I've never seen you move so quickly.
Give him time.
Is your hair normally that upright? It is now.
So here comes tonight's confession. It comes from Baz. Thank you, Baz. Father Simon and the virtuous sowers of love and forgiveness. Now, the reason why I've kept this for a Thursday is that it does need a Yorkshire accent. Now, that is not in my repertoire, but what I thought I'd do is I'm a little bit nervous. I am actually going to go for it, but only because we've got a Yorkshireman in the room and you can correct me and then do it properly if I make it patronising and stupid.
Right, lad.
Exactly like that. See?
This is going to be good.
So Matt's already looking at me disapprovingly.
No, I'm not. I can't
I think
wait.
It's fine. I wouldn't have done it Monday, Tuesday,
fine.
Wednesday, but I feel as I have permission to do it because Nigel's here. My confession takes us back to the early 1990s and a time when it appeared there was suddenly an enormous need for people to print their own business cards. It's Baz, Bobby. Baz, B-A-Z.
I was trying to decipher the writing from those
It's
two.
not difficult. It's 3 letters, Baz.
Training to be a doctor.
Okay. And everyone's desired to print their own business cards. We shall return to the business card thing in a moment. Let me tell you for the moment about my friends Aaron and Will. Aaron was the cool kid, the one who everybody wanted to be, despite the fact that he was actually quite mean and loved himself more than I would have previously considered humanly possible. Will, on the other hand, liked to hang around with us, but despite his best efforts was not and was never going to be cool. He was, however, a useful source of sweets and lunch money, and his mother knocked up a mean pavlova. As for me, well, I suppose I was somewhere in the middle, and for the purposes of this confession, I should be grateful if you'll call me by my name, Baz. I almost said William there for a moment, but that would have been wrong. Partly because of the aforementioned pavlova, but also because of her general all-round loveliness, we enjoyed spending time with Will's mum, and therefore often spent time at his house after school. It baffled us, therefore, that such a lovely, almost angelic woman should be married to Trevor, Will's father, a short-tempered, mean-spirited little man with his funny eyes and premature hair loss only adding to our sense of bemusement.
It's funny eyes.
Funny eyes.
Sounds like me.
It does.
Trevor would happily send us on our way if he came home from work to find us sitting at the kitchen table, usually with a flea in our ear and some vague threat to call our parents about some deed or other that we might or might not have actually done. One night, Trevor sent us packing despite a huge downpour, leaving us to walk home in the pouring rain. Despite the fact that neither of us had yet passed our driving test, we didn't have a coat or umbrella to share between us, and he didn't lend us one. As we walked home on that black, cold and thoroughly unpleasant night, we plotted a sort of revenge against Trevor, and thinking back to the business card machine that had recently been installed at the local shopping centre, we quickly hatched a cunning plan. Firstly, I needed to pass my driving test the following week, and secondly, we needed to amass £7.50 in cash to enable us to purchase a bundle of 50 business cards. Fortunately, I did pass my driving test with just a small number of minor faults, and having raided both our piggy banks, we made our way to the local shopping centre to print up some cards. I have to say, Father Simon, I'm rather proud of the design that we came up with that day. The cards we produced were both professional and believable, bearing the name at the top in large bold font, Trevor's Taxi Service. Beneath that, we included Will's phone number, along with some other choice phrases such as specialists in airport transfers. Call us anytime, day or night.
Oh, no.
Having printed the cards, we then purchased a packet of blue tack and began to drive around our rather large town, stopping at every phone box that we found to carefully stick a business card in between all the other cards that were there.
Yeah.
It took us several hours, but we were finally able to find a home for every single business card. Our only slight sadness came from the fact that we were unlikely to be at Will's house when the phone started ringing. Well, ring it did, Father Simon, and boy oh boy did it ring. In fact, the phone rang so often they were actually lucky enough to hear at least one side of the phone conversation on multiple occasions. Each time the result was similar, with a rather confused traveller in need of a taxi service who found themselves talking to an irate Yorkshireman who fired questions at them whilst a large vein pulsed in his forehead, barking out things like,
Here we go.
Go on.
Take a run up.
Okay.
Here we go.
Okay, barking out things like, where did thou get this number? And, do I sound like a bloomin' taxi driver to you, lad? How did I do?
Yeah, but I think I know that person.
Okay.
Charlie, never mind.
Was that all right? So is that possible?
Yeah.
Yeah, see? King of the accents,
I
see?
think Joe Root might have had a bit of that going on earlier today.
Is that right?
Yeah.
We did feel a little bad when shortly after this incident, Will's mum pointed out to us that they'd received 7 calls the night before, the last one being at 4 o'clock in the morning. Anyway, Trevor did ultimately figure out that these cards were being found in phone boxes, and he then spent an entire weekend driving around the town trying to find as many as possible. Unfortunately, in many cases, the cards had been transferred to people's wallets for use another day. It also became clear later on that he couldn't have found every phone box when 2 policemen arrived at his door asking him about suspected illegal advertising. Fortunately, the policemen were able to establish that Trevor wasn't really moonlighting as a taxi driver, and having changed their number shortly afterwards, the calls for taxis did obviously dry up. Trevor long suspected our involvement, but we always maintained our innocence, claiming to have neither the funds nor the wherewithal to carry out such a stunt. Fortunately for us, Trevor also had several other suspects at the local working men's club, and so we were never under his gaze for too long at any one point. But he did point at various other people on the way. Father Simon, obviously we don't seek forgiveness from Trevor, who was a deeply unpleasant man, what with those eyes and everything, and frankly deserved everything he got. Nor indeed do we seek forgiveness from Will, who shortly afterwards decided he didn't want to hang around with us any longer, and instead focused on his studies.
Oh, apparently that's a bad thing. Oh, right, okay.
The fact that Will attended Oxford University around the time that Aaron and I started employment with a well-known burger retailer suggests to me that his life wasn't unduly impacted by the events described above. We would, however, like to seek forgiveness from Betty, Will's long-suffering mother. After we stopped spending time with him, I found that I missed her kind listening ear and warm smile just as much as the pavlova, and I'm sure she must have found living with Trevor almost unbearable during that time, what with his eyes and everything.
What's going on?
This is a sign from Baz,
Unbelievable.
the now taxi driver. Yes, the irony is not lost on me.
Yeah.
So that's exactly what he's ended up doing. Well, I think with a winning Yorkshire accent, how can you do anything else but be mightily impressed, Bobby Pryor?
Well, you got these teenage boys, yes? And pavlova and hanging around somebody else's house, eating all their food. I feel sorry for Trevor because I understand. I do understand sending you off into the night. He should have been hanging around his house, leading his boy astray and distracting his wife because obviously she had things to do. and making pavlova for
Well,
you
there was a
not one
he
of them.
fancied the pavlova,
Yeah,
certainly.
well, yeah,
He
I know.
certainly
So I'm with Trevor here. I think he was onto your game, and sending you home in the dark to cool you off was probably a good idea. So actually, Baz, you don't get my support here. I admire your effort. It's good effort. Not forgiven.
The novice, then.
Yeah, well, Trev, he does sound properly horrid. I mean, really, and a grumpy Yorkshireman, that'll never happen, surely. And also the fact that one of my favourite people in the world is Auntie Betty, and she's from Yorkshire. And she's lovely.
What? Hang on.
Well, no,
Just
she's
'cause
from
he's got the
Yorkshire.
same name.
You did the Yorkshire accent, and
I
well done
tried.
for you. Yeah, absolutely. And we don't like Trev at all. But Auntie Betty, yeah, you're forgiven. Baz, absolutely forgiven.
Well argued.
Can I be the only one who finds themselves very much in Trevor's corner here? What are these kids doing hanging around in my house, eating my pavlova, talking to my wife all the time and leading my son astray? I would have sent them out into the night and into the rain with no hesitation. And also, I wouldn't have been quite so forgiving as far as people ringing me up with airport transfers. So, but that said, a valiant effort with the accent. I mean, you know, a lesser man would have balked there, and you didn't. So I'm going to forgive.
The Confessions Podcast.
Father Simon and the presiding posse of proficient pundits.
Well done.
It's new.
Tick.
After many years of much hilarity about this incident among his close friends over a glass or two, I feel it's high time for my husband, Patrick, to seek forgiveness from a wider, more objective audience. The tale goes back to 1976 and unfolds in a Catholic church in Teesside. Let's call it St. Jackie's. At the time, Patrick was a 13-year-old altar boy, and one of his important roles involved calmly setting up a bewildering array of sacred objects in advance of the service in order to enable the priest to orchestrate seamlessly Mass without a hitch. So that's what Patrick had to do. One particular Sunday, Patrick was tasked to collect 3 sacred objects and place them on the table at the back of the church, ready for chosen stalwarts of the community to process them up the aisle and present them to the priest at the appointed time. These objects were the wine chalice, which was a large goblet, in this case of burnished gold encrusted with precious stones. Why? The ciborium, I'm guessing you say it like that, a larger covered container which contained the communion wafers, and the paten, which is a shallow golden dish used to contain the priest's wafer at the most important part of the Mass. Patrick was running late, as usual, and had only just arrived as the service was about to begin to a packed and expectant house. This, if you recall, was 1976, and my husband, concealed under a hurriedly donned cassock, was wearing his newest, most trendy attire. Ben Sherman checked shirt, Levi stay-pressed trousers, and, worn most proudly of all, new black leather brogues. These shoes gave him particular pleasure, festooned as they were. About to get a cultural reference which I don't think has ever been referred to in any confession.
Okay.
Festooned as they were from toe to heel with the must-have accessories of the day, Blakey's segs, which were protective metal pieces which went on the soles of the shoes. Did you have Blakey's?
No, I didn't know.
This was the coolest thing. Did you have them,
I
Bobby?
did, yes. So you
That's
can
what
tap dance.
You put a Blakey on the front, you put a Blakey on the back, and you clicked as you went down.
Yes.
And it said, "I'm significant and I'm important." That's absolutely what it said. If you had Blakey's on, you were definitely cooler.
Just
But
what you need in church.
That's what you have, metal on the bottom of your shoe. That's what it was all about. Aware that everyone was ready and Mass was about to begin, Patrick made a snap decision. He quickly grabbed the chalice in one hand, scooped up the ciborium in the other. Now, this is very much against normal procedure, which advised taking only one holy receptacle at a time. This correct procedure meant that the chalice could be transported with one hand around the stem and the other hand gently securing the paten on top. The ciborium would then normally have to wait for a second journey. Unabashed, however, Patrick hurried full pelt. I mean, who knows how this is going to...
I don't know.
Who knows how this is going to end up?
No idea.
He hurried full pelt down the central aisle, heading for the back of the church with his precious cargo in both hands, simultaneously enjoying the sound of the sharp, staccato clickety-clack as the Blakeys came into contact with the marble floor beneath. His enjoyment, however, was short-lived.
Oh, was it?
He's about halfway down the aisle when, as his customised left heel went down, the Blakey failed to grip on the marble and his foot went from underneath him, whizzing skywards off the smooth surface. Propelled by the impetus into a backwards somersault-type orbit, the continued momentum of the rotational force simultaneously released the sacred objects from his hands and launched them into the air, the chalice and paten heading for one side of the aisle, the ciborium to the other. Everything now appeared to happen in slow motion. As Patrick plummeted backwards to meet the marble, he recalls seeing the usually secure fitting lid of the ciborium popping off like a cork, and a myriad little wafers fluttering down like oversized snowflakes onto the upturned faces of the stunned congregation. On the other side, with a deafeningly sonorous clanging, the chalice and paten hit the floor with considerable force, scattering gems among the tightly packed feet. Then he hit the floor with a sickening thud. After a brief moment of winded, agonised chaos, he found himself crawling along the floor among the feet of the congregation, hastily collecting together the warped paten, severely dented chalice, dislodged stones, and the remaining half-handful of tattered communion wafers. Even in this most desperate of moments, badly bruised and mortified with embarrassment, Patrick thought he detected a surreptitious shuffling of feet as the less scrupulous members of the flock saw an opportunity to conceal the odd emerald or ruby. Hey, welcome to church. Anything to confess? You with a pocket full of emeralds. Back on his feet, Patrick limped towards the sacristy, painfully aware that every head had spun around to follow him. Among the glacial stares were dotted expressions of pained sympathy and smirking amusement. It was then that he caught a glimpse of his mother's stricken face in the third pew from the front, aghast, ashen and slack-jawed, before she turned to bury her head in her hands. I will draw a veil over the exact dialogue between Patrick and the priest. Suffice to say that the prelate's rage was near volcanic, as sadly this was not the first unfortunate incident involving this most well-meaning but perhaps not entirely suitable of altar boys. On behalf of my husband, I seek forgiveness not from the congregation, who I'm very sure thoroughly enjoyed the spectacle that must have provided them with a great story for their neighbours and the lads down the pub, nor from the priest, who perhaps should have paid a little more attention to the age and aptitude of the altar boys performing tasks of such importance, but from Patrick's mother, who went to church that morning expecting a little quiet contemplation and prayer in the company of friends, but ended up rocked to the foundations by her son's procedural disaster of near-biblical proportions. Yours, Amanda, who I think had as much fun writing that as I did reading that out. Check out the members of the congregation. Is that a...
Oh, wow.
I'll palm that and we'll... That looks as though it might be real. Anyway, Sister Bobby, what do you say?
Well, Patrick sounds lovely. I mean, well turned out or what? And it was 1976, the big heat wave.
You had to have the Blakeys on, though. That's the thing. You have to go clickety-clack, but sometimes...
The thing is, he's not responsible for the marble floor, and those are slippery at the best of times, in the wet. So I don't think it's really Patrick's fault. And this is a place of forgiveness and love.
Yes.
So I think it's one of those things that, everyone should have helped him. Which they didn't help him, they kind of helped themselves.
Yes,
and,
very good.
And maybe it was a chance for fresh wafers, so, there's a good thing.
So here's the thing about Blakey's. At our school, we had like stone corridors, and if you couldn't afford Blakey's, you'd put drawing pins in the soles of your shoes, and then you could go sliding. And the really cool kids worked out how to showers of sparks would go out as you slid down.
How did these die out?
But don't try any of that at home, by the way.
So I'm going to forgive.
Are you going to forgive?
You're going to forgive, yeah.
Brother Matthew.
Well, yes, I'm going to forgive as well. Two reasons. One, I'm no theologian, but I don't think the stuff that they're bringing up is sacred until it's actually got to the altar. So,
So it's not blessed.
So it's not. It's perfectly fine. And also, who's making this decision? We're going to give it to Patrick. We're going to make Patrick do this thing that's really important. What, the bloke who's got the Blakeys that's always late and that's going to be slipping up everywhere? And oh, by the way, he's done it before. Yeah, him. Let's make sure we give that really important job to him and make sure he's carrying the one with all the emeralds whilst he's doing it. So it's not Patrick's fault at all. So definitely forgiven.
Simon Mayo's Confessions podcast.
That was Amanda's Confession, Holy Commotion. If you missed that going out live, and I know many of you have some very good, apparently, reasons for not listening in live, thanks a lot. Most people don't have a really good excuse. Anyway, you'll have missed this reaction to Amanda's tale on the People's Verdict. And is it times like these
Yes,
you have to ask yourself what Michael Flatley would have done?
Michael Flatley?
Well, he'd have hopped and skipped with his Blakeys, wouldn't you? How about that? You won't believe this, but Matt actually got up on the desk there.
Yeah, I did.
To dance along.
Gotta love the Flatley.
Still to come on this week's surely soon-to-be an award-winning podcast, find out what's brought on another classic Matt rant.
I mean, number one, if you'd gone back to the artist and said, can you do... And you'd go, no, I don't quite have the muse for my crayon with my stick man anymore. Can I have another 12 grand? Yes, I've now got the muse back. Funny how that works. There is an argument that isn't art in the eye of the beholder, and so therefore, if I choose to sand off half of your 12 grand crayon painting,
Keep going, Matt.
maybe I'm making it better. Thought about that, Leonardo?
I wonder if you got your Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles mixed up there and you actually meant Michelangelo.
Yeah.
Who was the painter. Oh, no, that's our wonderful assistant, Sister Chloe, ringing the bell to remind us that the parish notice board has been fully updated. I never knew that there was a bell, but that's what the bell is. It's the update bell. So let's have a look at some of your correspondence from the last 7 days. Regular listeners will know that this is also where those who have done the most to further the word of pod are rewarded with some dodgy old Radio 2 merchandise, which has just been brought in by producer Phil. We found them down the back of Ken Bruce's trousers.
What? What is it we're giving away?
Well, the Drive Time car stickers and Steve Wright clocks are all gone, but I'm pleased to say we've uncovered some very ordinary-looking Radio 2 pens.
Goodness me.
But they are a one-off, aren't they? They're kind of limited supply.
Well, no one wanted them, if that's what you mean.
Not available in the shops, kids.
Anyway, Matt, you've had a good nosy at the board.
Yes.
What have you selected to read to our flock?
I've got an email here from Polly, who says, Father Simon, Sister Bobby, Brother Matt. I am 15 and absolutely love listening to both your radio show and the Confessions podcast.
Yes.
Actually, Polly, yeah. This morning I declared my love of both to my friends, who then laughed at me and said that Radio 2 was for old people.
Correct.
Despite...
But let's define old,
no.
15 and above.
Yeah, obviously. Despite this, I convinced an unwilling friend to subscribe to your podcast, but the other friend refused. See photo 1 attached. There it is.
Yeah,
there's photo. Yeah. I then convinced another of my friends to subscribe at lunchtime, who was more excited at the prospect of listening to your show than the other two. Although, as she had her mouth full of food at the time, you can't get a real sense of her true excitement.
But she does look a whole lot classier than your other friend.
Yeah, absolutely, quite right. Next, I thought it highly appropriate to get my RE teacher to subscribe to. Who better to join in listening to the confessions than a religious expert? Sadly, the only evidence for this is the picture of sticky note that she wrote on, and this Mrs. Hoyland, RE teacher, has subscribed. Smiley face. We're not meant to take pictures of teachers at school. I didn't know that.
Is that right?
Thing? Yeah, apparently. My final good deed for the day was to convince my DT teacher to subscribe as well. I asked him in the middle of the canteen.
No photograph of him either.
No, so I can't provide any evidence for this. So I guess we'll just have to take his word for it. My friends also laughed at me for going to these extents just for a sticker. They are rather boring.
Correct.
Thank you from Polly. P.S. Matt, you're absolutely hilarious. P.P.S. Simon, your accents are also hilarious. Yes. P.P.P.S. Bobby, thanks for acting as a moral compass for the other two, as they sometimes seem to lack one. P.P. P.P. P.P.S. I'm confused as to what merch you're giving away these days, but I'll gladly take anything you'd like to send.
Okay, well, for such dedication to the cause, Polly, you can be the first recipient of a Radio 2 pen, which is bound to help you pass all your exams. It does have special magic powers.
You were holding your pen there. That is not a Radio 2 pen.
And it's transparent.
Yes.
State-of-the-art transparency.
Yes.
It's got a spring. And it's got a little biro thing in the... And it's got
Do you remember this is like what they used to do in very bad interviews in the 90s? They'd give you a pen and say, sell me this pen.
Did they?
Yeah, that's what it is.
Matt,
yes.
sell me this pen.
You could see its inner workings. That's the magic
there
of it.
Isn't it?
Yeah.
And I seeing the inner workings of us all, isn't it, Bobby?
No.
Think about
Go
it.
on, sell me that pen.
Very much so. It's a pen.
Okay, I'll take it. Thanks very much.
Well done. Sold.
Bobby, you've got something on the parish notice board deserving of a Radio 2 pen, maybe?
I
Is it
do.
that good?
I certainly do, because following on from last week, where Jess in Devon sent in a U-rated mini confession
Yes, that was very
about
good.
her son Jack. Well, we've had another nursery-based food confession, this time sent in by Paul. It says, Dear Father Simon and the perfectionist purveyors of palpable justice.
Good.
Very good. My son, who shall remain nameless, was at the children's nursery in the early 1990s and was not the most well-behaved boy. He wasn't the worst either. We went to collect him one day and the nursery staff were most apologetic. Our poor son had cried out that a girl had bitten him during lunch.
Oh, typical girls.
Watch it. When the staff checked, sure enough, on his arm was an obvious mark that could only be caused by teeth. The girl's mother was there and she was distraught. Her precious girl had never done anything like this before. 2 days later, the same thing happens and there is puzzlement all round. The girl doesn't bite anyone else, just our son. The next few days, the staff watch them both carefully and something comes to light. When they are eating, my son, sadly taking after his father, eats his food as fast as he can, then turns to the girl next to him and begins to eat her fish fingers off her plate. The little girl, who is too young to speak, responds in the only way she can by biting him on the arm. Mystery solved. On his behalf, I would like him to seek forgiveness from the young girl who is probably traumatised every time she eats a meal. The nursery nurses who must have been petrified of informing the owner of the nursery who, whilst not the scariest of people, also happens to be my mother and obviously the boy's grandmother.
Right.
I think Matt will undoubtedly forgive, as my son is the oldest and not an art student.
Good.
Bobby, obviously, will almost certainly not forgive because the poor victim may very well have long-term trauma. So do we forgive Paul's son?
For provoking the girl who did the biting.
Yeah, he stole her fish fingers.
Yes.
Well, but maybe she didn't need them.
No. He ate fast, so then he could eat hers, and the only thing
But
she could do was
He was
bite
growing
him.
faster.
In a way, isn't that what, it's an important life lesson, Bobby, isn't it? You've got to eat your food fast, because you never know when it's being taken away.
No, because we're a
That's very much
civilised
right.
society. We're not loads of a pack of dogs in the kitchen, are we?
You haven't seen me eat. That's exactly
true.
what I look like.
Anyway,
All right,
what do we
this is,
think?
what's this? It's not the moral maze, For heaven's sake. When Michael Portillo was in on the show this week, he was all smartly dressed and not like he normally
Yeah.
wears, Anyway, I said, why are you like that? He said, I'm off to the moral maze with Michael Burke.
Yes.
Yes, and that's how he was dressed all smart for the moral maze.
And I spoke to him because I was in the lift with him going down, and he said, "Yeah, I'm going on the moral maze." And I said, "Oh, well, you'll have to have the high moral high ground there, then, Michael." And he said, "No, I'm not doing that bit."
He said they'd asked him to argue on something that he didn't agree with.
Yeah.
So it was anyway. Obviously, the point is, if you've got bright yellow pajamas, you can't you can't argue the moral high ground.
No,
I think
you
that's
can't, no.
Anyway. A pen is on its way to Paul. Remember, we'll only be rewarding outstanding contributions to the podcast. You have to show true devotion to the cause if you'd like to have a Radio 2 pen or whatever it is we're giving away. Get your creative hat on. Email confessions@bbc.co.uk. Last week, a Mrs. Purcell emailed to say she'd made listening to the Confessions podcast part of her class's curriculum. And come on, other teachers, this is hardcore. And it even managed to get all of her 200 pupils at the Lycée International des Pointaniers to subscribe. And this week, Mrs. Purcell got back in touch to say, may I take this opportunity to congratulate you, Simon, on your French pronunciation. It was
please.
impeccable. And you have demonstrated yet again you are a true man of the world, experienced in the ways of
Goodness me.
international sophistication. And she is the voice of the Lycée International des Pointaniers. Merci.
Hang on a
Au
second.
revoir.
Did you write that bit?
Écoutez et
Yes.
répétez. What?
Did
No.
you write that?
I didn't.
Oh,
I think
okay.
it's Antonasia now, isn't it? Yeah, I think I'm right.
Anyway, what comes next? Anyway, that's the overacting Sister Chloe stumbling upon some correspondence for the next section.
What is going on? Why we got access to some soundtrack CD?
It's our weekly trawl through the gutter, highlighting your downright disgusting and horrifying confessions that, for reasons that will become very obvious, haven't made the cut. So as not to risk a visit from Ofcom, we present the merest hints of these X-rated confessions, including this one from Peter. Now, we know that you were exhausted from driving through London traffic on the way to your family outing at the Royal Albert Hall, Peter. We understand why you told your young boys that story to shut them up, but it all backfired spectacularly, didn't it, when a passing former Prime Minister briefly stopped to get round you and was asked by one of your sons, "Excuse me, sir, do you know where they keep Hitler's other testicle?"
What?
Well,
That's a very good story, yes.
That is. I can only imagine it was a whole lot worse when it was
Yes.
originally sent in.
Yeah.
If there are any former Prime Ministers
Yes.
listening and downloading, that now you know it was a bizarre thing to be stopped and told, but anyway. Pat's confession isn't too graphic, but definitely not the kind that you want to hear at tea time. After being bothered for a good 10 minutes on his train journey by our daddy longlegs, Matt decided to swat it away. He didn't think about where it might end up, though, and looked on slightly horrified as the daddy longlegs went straight into the mouth of a female passenger opposite.
Wow.
Cue much coughing and spluttering and the insect reappearing and flying to safety.
But the daddy longlegs was okay. That's all. Yeah,
that's the only thing that matters, is it?
Yeah.
Yes.
Never mind the person who swallowed an insect.
Well, it kind of went in and went out again, didn't it?
It sounds like a pretty good shot. I mean, how big was her mouth? Not very big, I'm going to guess.
Is there another one?
Speaking of things you shouldn't put in your mouth, the confession from Young Fool horrified us on several counts. Thanks, Young Fool. Just because you didn't take to your friend's new girlfriend, was that really an excuse to put dog food in her pie? I don't think so.
What?
You also hid some in the back of her oven, so when she went to cook the pie, the kitchen became a smoke-filled nightmare, which the fire brigade had to attend. A dog wouldn't behave that badly, Young Fool, so it's a rough justice for you.
Definitely.
Not forgiven.
Rough justice, very good.
Thanks. Mark, I know you were only looking after your sister, who was being treated badly by the star of the latest show at the theatre she worked at. But was it really necessary to replace the fake rain required for the show's finale with that particular fluid?
Oh, no. Well, that's not good.
We could have done that one.
Really? No way.
And Gareth, I'm sure there's lots of laddish behaviour at the fire station, but the prank with the brown sauce sachets taped below the toilet seat is really
Oh, we should have thought of that. That's very good.
not suitable for tea time. Obviously, no one is paying any attention to our warning, so just send in whatever you've got. confessions@bbc.co.uk. Right, Sister Chloe is giving us a look that says, move away from the notice board now. And she's making that noise. Which is strange. Anyway, it's time to get back to this week's Confessions with Shane's story, Groove is in the Art.
The Confessions Podcast.
Simon and friends, my confession happened in the summer of 2006 in the Hamptons, the posh part of Long Island, where the likes of Jerry Seinfeld, Puff Daddy, anyone who's anyone in New York has a summer home to escape to in the hot summers. So this is a high-end confession, that's what this is. My boss Peter had won a contract for a $9 million house on a part of East Hampton called Georgia Pond. The house was a beautiful piece of property which had been renovated and restored to the new owner's plans. I was part of a crew of Irish carpenters and contractors who were working on the development. There were about 15 of us in total. The new owners kindly let us stay in the home while we worked.
Really?
Really, yes, amazing. And we enjoyed rather a few fun evenings winding down after a long day's work. I think that might have been edited, that bit. None of which is suitable to be read out at tea time and not relevant to the confession I'm about to announce. But boy, did we have a good time. Anyway, the painter in our team was Rory, who wasn't actually a painter, but our boss, Peter, who was always a good talker, convinced the owners he was as good as Leonardo da Vinci himself. Part of Rory's job was to sand down the walls of cedar throughout the house to bring it back to its natural state. We hired 3 extra men to help him with the job, each with an electric sander in hand, and it still took 6 weeks for them to complete the job.
Goodness
That's how
me.
big the house was. I mean, that's just like an estate.
They'd have shaky arms.
They would have done, but that's their job, so they're probably super muscly.
Yeah.
When we were reaching the last few days of work, we needed to arrange to meet with the owner to go through the house with the snag list, noting off any jobs that hadn't been finished, a little bit of extra work here and there. Once this was done, Boss Peter would be paid the last payment of $10,000. Woohoo! The date to go through the snag list was set up, and it would be with me, the foreman, Peter, the boss, Rory, the painter, and Eleanor, the owner of this beautiful pad. The morning of the meeting arrived and Peter picked me up. We were meeting Eleanor and Rory at the house. As we arrived, there was no sign of Rory, so me, Peter and Eleanor carried on walking from room to room, and I wrote down in my notebook everything that needed to be done on the snag list. Halfway through our tour, we turned a corner into the hallway, and Peter and I gasped at the sight in front of us. It looked like a child had picked up a red crayon and scribbled up and down, round and round and all over the beautiful sanded cedar in a section of the wall. It looked terrible. Peter screams, "Who on earth has done that?" I'm obviously not giving it a literal
No.
or doing the voice.
No.
I asked Eleanor if her children could have been the culprits, but Eleanor just laughed and told us to look carefully at the bottom. Look carefully at the bottom.
Oh, you are doing the accent.
Well, that's okay to do that one.
You're not going to do the one.
I'm not going to do the Irish carpenter, am I? Obviously. When we got closer and had a closer look at the wall, we could just see a little matchstick man, the size of basically a matchstick, I suppose, holding a red crayon and looking over his shoulder. And beside this was a signature. Eleanor said, "Do you know who this artist is?" We didn't have a clue. Eleanor then said, "How much do you think I paid for this piece of art?"
What?
And we started to guess what you paid for it. I don't know, $50? No. $100?
No.
Upwards and upwards it went. Eleanor continued to laugh at we guessed $700, $900. To our astonishment, she told us it cost $12,000.
Oh, no.
We continued with the snag list, and there was still no sign of Rory. I mean, what could possibly go wrong? As lunch rolled in, Eleanor was going into town. We were going to meet back in an hour to continue with the snagging. Peter and I were both hungry, so we went out to grab a sandwich. As we pulled back into the driveway, we noticed Rory's pickup. He had turned up. So we took our lunch into the house and we planned to catch up with Rory to find out why he was so late.
Yes, I
We
wonder
opened
why.
the first door and we could immediately hear the sound of a sander coming from the corridor.
Oh, I'm sure it'll be fine.
Peter and I looked at each other with open mouths. Rory didn't know about that artwork.
Oh, no.
We both dropped our sandwiches and ran in the direction of Rory and his sander. As we turned the corner, in a cloud of cedar dust, Rory pushed up his protective glasses and said with his strong Irish accent,
Yeah?
Yeah.
"Well, would you look at what some idiot has done to my wall?" Peter ripped the sander power cord from the socket and I fell over in tears, not able to control myself laughing. Rory had wiped off
Oh, no. No.
at least $6,000 worth of this famous scribble. Peter started to explain to Rory who this artist was and how much the fancy scribble had cost. "This was art, man! Couldn't you tell it was art?" I was then ordered to go to the kids' rooms to look for a red crayon to match to match the red on the wall.
Obviously.
Rory was on lookout for Eleanor, and Peter was now the artist. We'd found the correct crayon, and Peter matched the cut-off points where the artwork had been sanded, and he scribbled up and down to the next line. All he kept thinking of was his final payment, which, funnily enough, was pretty much the same price as this masterpiece. Father Simon, that's how it was. I'd like to ask forgiveness from Eleanor because Peter did such a good job. It was never noticed that the graffiti art had been tampered with, and as soon as Peter got paid, we got out of there. Pretty sharpish. What is it they say about modern art? Asks Shane at the end of his email. I don't know, Shane. What is it that they say about modern art? Anyway, it certainly turned out that you didn't need to pay $10,000, $12,000 for this because Peter the Chippy could have done it for next to nothing. Anyway, what do we learn from that? Let's check in with Sister Bobby, see what she makes of that.
The first discovery, when they turned around the corner, I thought Rory was going to be asleep in the corridor as they came round, kind of maybe he'd been partying the night before and he'd just be in his shorts. That's the first thing. I was really relieved that he wasn't found like that. So I wasn't expecting this. I am sitting on the fence a bit because I understand why you were trying to save Peter's kind of last payment. I do understand the kind of attempt, but I think you should have still come clean. I think you should have done. Because I don't think it's fair on the artist. That's why I think so. So I kind of forgive you.
I think the artist is fine.
No.
So they should have said, "I'm sorry, we've sanded off $5,000, $6,000
Yeah, because I
worth of art."
reckon if Eleanor went back and said, this has happened, you never know. The artist might come back and said, "Look, that's really hilarious. I will come back." Because there was no malice,
All right.
it? You can understand everyone's position.
There's
So I
a-
think you should have fessed up.
There's a berry involved. I know what Matt's
Yeah,
going to say.
definitely. I mean, obviously, this plays to every prejudice I have about art. And I know that my wife is listening at home and is rolling her eyes about how I'm going to address this. But I mean, number one, if you'd gone back to the artist and said, "Can you?" And you'd go, "No, I don't quite have the muse for my crayon with my stick man anymore. Can I have another $12,000? Yes, I've now got the muse back." Funny how that works. I am going to forgive because there is an argument that isn't art in the eye of the beholder, and so therefore if I choose to sand off half of your $12,000 crayon painting, maybe I'm making it better. Thought about that, Leonardo, etc. So yes, I'm going to forgive.
This is the place where penitents seek our pardon for their sins. Simon Mayo's Confessions podcast.
Here comes a confession. Now, we should say right at the very beginning that if you are eating your dinner,
Hey!
it's just something to be aware of.
Yeah.
That's all. There's everything is entirely natural, but it might be that you're thinking, oh, really, please, at this time? Sufficient warning, PG. Comes from Kiri, as in Takanawa. So it's Kiri, Kiri. Dear Father Simon and the Forgiving Collective, my terrible sin took place some 13 years ago when I was a young, slightly disorganised mother who feared terribly what people might think of me. And we all suffer from that just a bit. It all began after yet another sleepless night, approximately 12 months into my new life of being a mum. Tired doesn't really describe the feeling of being woken again and again every 2 hours for a period of months, which may go some way to explaining why I wasn't raring to get up in the morning to leap into the day's activities. However, on this day, my son and I did have an activity planned, so I did get out of bed, albeit in a fashion more like cold custard being poured out of a jug. You get the picture. It was approximately 8:20 a.m. by the time I had managed to dress myself and the small child, who invariably delayed the process by using every tactic known to small children. By the time we managed to get down to breakfast, it was pushing 8:35, so we were definitely pushing our limits time-wise. It was therefore a quick shoveling in of a bowl of cornflakes for us both before heading off for our morning activity. Okay. Now, as luck would have it, traffic was light that day and we arrived at the leisure centre in plenty of time and even before others had arrived. To my pleasant surprise, getting changed went surprisingly well. My son was cheery and clearly looking forward to what was in store. In fact, we'd done so well that we were the first to get ready and get through to the swimming pool. This is where we were, of course, where the very popular baby and toddler swimming session took place. And all before 9 a.m. I am an amazing mum, thought Kiri. I have got this cracked. Don't get too far ahead of me.
No.
It was customary to enter the pool as and when you were ready and have a gentle little splash whilst waiting for the remainder of the participants and the swimming teacher, and so it was with great delight that my son and I climbed into the virgin water of that day, my stress and tiredness quickly dissipating. I floated my baby around as if I was in some kind of dream and lifted him in and out of the water, cooing at him in wonderment. This is what motherhood was all about.
Correct.
It was just about then that my beautiful little miracle had a little cough.
Oh, no.
Poor little love was teething, which made him a little bit mucusy. Then, for some bizarre reason, it flashed through my mind, precisely at this point, I wonder what happens when a child is sick in the swimming pool.
Oh, right.
And then,
Yes.
miraculously, it was so. No sooner had I thought about it than it happened. My blissful romantic moment came crashing down as the cornflake slick began to spread out
lovely.
across the pool.
Yeah.
A stream of curdled milk with
Okay.
cornflakes poured over my chest and down into my swimming costume.
Right.
I stood with my vomiting baby in the air, shouting for someone to help and rescue me from the cornflake nightmare in which I found myself. To my relief, a lifeguard quickly came to my aid and helped me and my son get out of the now cornflake-contaminated pool. But as I looked down, to my horror, with all the movement, the contents of my son's stomach was now steadily diffusing its way around much of the swimming pool. The lifeguard informed me he'd have to get the manager to speak to me, so I stood on the side of the pool, dripping wet, cornflakes in my cleavage, and curdled... I'm sure
Cornflakes in my cleavage.
Isn't that a book by Hattie Jakes?
Carly Simon, isn't it?
Anyway, curdled milk was slowly sliding down my legs. I was clutching my son, who was perfectly all right after his cough, the way kids are. It recovered immediately. Anyway, oblivious to the horror that was unfolding in front of me. Awkwardly, I waited until the very neat, quite officious and suited man approached me. Once he'd established we were okay, he then said, I must ask, I'm afraid, but at what time did you feed your child this morning? Well, I took a quick look at the clock on the wall behind the man. It was only just 9 a.m, meaning I'd only fed my son a mere 20 minutes or so before. What an idiot. Everyone knows you shouldn't eat before swimming. But I had fed my baby straight before coming swimming, and look at what had happened. How irresponsible could I be? Terrified of being labelled the blithering, incompetent mother that I had clearly been, I did the only thing that I could think. I lied. Not by much, but just a little bit, so that it didn't seem as though I had been completely incompetent. Must have been about 8:15, something like that, I said, looking guiltily at the crowd of mothers and toddlers slowly gathering at the side of the pool, who were all looking at the contents of the pool with varying degrees of disgust. Are you sure it was 8:15, says the manager. Yes, I replied, definitely 8:15, no later than that. Everyone knows you shouldn't eat too close before going swimming. I added as I cringed further, cornflakes now accumulating in little puddles of milky water around my feet. That's really frustrating, exclaimed the manager. Had it been 8:30 or afterwards, we could have been fairly sure it wasn't a bug that had caused the vomiting. But as it was that you clearly fed him, we'll have to cancel the whole day's activities and we'll have to empty the pool completely.
No.
Oh, this was bad, says Kiri. The pool didn't need emptying, but how could I now backtrack and tell the important man that I'd lied? My incompetence was spiralling out of control. The manager charged off to begin implementing the clearly very arduous task that lay before him. I was left standing on the side of the pool, facing a crowd of people, many of whom now had toddlers that were crying because they weren't able to have their swim that they'd spent days looking forward to. Forgiveness is clearly needed from the young lifeguard who probably could have done without having to deal with a vomit-covered panicked woman and her child first thing in the morning. Also from all the parents and their children who missed out on their swimming lesson that day, and most of whom were very supportive and said that anyone's child could be unexpectedly sick in the pool. And I suppose that's true. But mostly, Father Simon, I asked forgiveness for my son. I confess that this incident scarred me so badly I was too afraid to take him swimming again for years after that. He did eventually learn to swim, and now age 14 is a competent swimmer, but doesn't really enjoy it, for which I feel wholly responsible, as I imagine that images of cornflakes in my cleavage are never, ever going to be a help for anybody. It is a good name for a memoir, you got to say. Sister Bobby.
Oh, I feel really sorry for you. Heartbroken even. That must have been really distressing and uncomfortable. What I don't like is the manager, actually. If he'd even phrased it differently and said, look, just so we know what to do next, if he was fed just a few minutes ago, that would be great, because of course what you're trying to do is defend yourself. If you said that, then we don't have to close down the pool, and then you could have just been honest. And I suppose they would have netted the rest of the contents of the pool, or drained it, or had to do something. I don't know. I think it's unfortunate. I'm sure any parent with a child, whether you're a guardian or whether they're your own, has been caught out in a swimming pool in some way. There's two ends to them.
What?
Well, there's two ends to children, and they get into all sorts of trouble,
yes.
don't they? You know what I mean?
Yes.
There's two ends to them. What I'm
There
saying
are two
is,
ends.
I'm sure they've seen many things in the pool, but not necessarily in your cleavage. Anyway, so what I'm saying is, I'm forgiving.
Thank you
after
very
that
much
long-winded way round.
Cleavage. Yes, this must happen all the time. It must. I mean, these mother and baby, or parent and baby, where they go into the pool, and, my experience of my child when he was, very small, there's no way you're going to be able to legislate for when something is going to happen. So, it must happen all the time. And I must admit, if someone had said to me, when did you feed your child before you came here, my response would not have been very pleasant. I will be feeding my child when I see fit to feed my child, and
You
not
nosy
when...
Parker.
Quite right. But as it turned out, it was for the best of reasons. So I'm going to forgive, because, there's nothing you could have done. And it's what a shame you didn't go back into the pool, but never mind.
Simon Mayo's Confessions podcast.
That was Kiri's confession, Cornflake Girl, which prompted this reaction on the People's Verdict. Dave in Glossop. Simon, wasn't cornflakes in my cleavage the follow-up to Lipstick on My Collar by Brenda Lee? Proof there's nothing that can't be made 50% funnier with a boom tish added.
Proof.
Now, hopefully this week's confessions have inspired you to send in your own dark little secret. Heaven knows you've got enough of them. confessions@bbc.co.uk. But as regular listeners to the podcast will know, this isn't the end, as now it's time for the most recent confession we've excavated from the crypt. This week's tale was actually requested in last week's podcast. We are so reactive. It was Mark in New Milton. So just for you, Mark, here is the infamous Gorilla in the Fridge confession.
The Confessions podcast.
Gather round, here comes another drive time confession. By the way, an email from Robert in North Essex. Yesterday we had a confession from Ed the ex-zookeeper, and it mentioned a public school that was right next door to the zoo which he attended. Anyway, Robert in North Essex says, I was lucky to be at the same college a few years before that incident, in the days of long hair, wide lapels and flares. I visited the zoo many times, and I'm glad to say I treated both rules and animals with appropriate respect. I do remember, however, that there were some who boasted of breaking into the zoo at night, getting into one enclosure or another. I now suspect any enclosure may have its daylight occupants tucked up behind bars. Anyway, and he's just interesting updates there. he enjoys the show. Anyway, thank you very much indeed. I suspect there may well be some more confessions forthcoming from that appropriate college or zoo. Anyway, so yesterday we had one from Ed, the ex-zookeeper, and it went down rather well. And guess what?
What?
He sent in another one.
Brilliant.
So I don't think this has ever happened before. I don't think we've ever done a sneaky double on the confession. Have consecutive confessions. Another one from the extraordinary world of zookeeping. Ed, thank you very much indeed. Let's see if he gets a double here. Father Simon and the Forgiving and Wondrous Collective. Yeah, whatever. There are a couple of facts you need to know about this particular confession. Firstly, the zoo I worked in had an intercom network of strange phone-type handsets, which all the keepers had access to. Secondly, there is a well-known veterinary college nearby. And by the way, I should say at this point, this confession involves animal post-mortems. Okay? It's in that
That's
kind of
a first, isn't it? We haven't had one of them.
Yes, it's perfectly fine. No one needs to get particularly worried. It's not particularly... I'm just saying that's the area in which we're operating. Okay.
So to speak.
So to speak, indeed. Very good, thank you. It's a well-known vet college nearby, and the students there always relish to have the odd, strange and wondrous, perhaps unfortunate animal to do a post-mortem, a PM on. To make the PM process work, the deceased animal needed to be fresh and not frozen, so the zoo had a PM fridge in which small animals were placed and the college advised. They would then attend to collect the corpses and do whatever they do with them. The college, being full of students, did not work at the weekends, and as a result, if anything needed a PM on a Friday afternoon or the weekend, it would be collected on the Monday. Now, zookeepers are known for practical jokes within their ranks, and this Friday was no exception. I was working in the aquarium section when I heard the intercom buzzing insistently. So clearly he didn't just work with the crocs, this guy. So
I thought you were tied to one house.
Well, obviously he was working in the aquarium section for this particular story. Anyway, there goes the intercom again. So I stopped cleaning out the piranha tank and went to answer the phone. So I guess
you do.
Well, there's a thing. So if you're going to work in the aquarium,
He's got a cool job,
I
doesn't he?
I want to work with the piranhas. Thanks very much. I went to answer the phone. I answered, and Bob, my northern colleague, asked, I'm not doing the voice.
Yes, please.
Ed, why is there a dead angelfish in the post-mortem fridge? Well, I was aghast. Had we lost one of our prized angelfish? Surely I would have known about this, what with me working in the aquarium. I said I didn't know and I would go and check. The PM fridge was basically a large, tall fridge like you have in your house, and normally contained horizontal shelves on which the hapless animals were placed. It had a solid door and not one of those glass ones that you see in the shops. It was contained in a room on the ground floor of the main zoo admin block, and you walk down a corridor with doors leading off to offices on either side. I walked into the room, grasped the fridge door handle and swung it open to inspect our prized but now dead angelfish. My scream was clearly audible throughout the corridor of offices. I slammed the door shut and took a while to recover before opening the door slowly again to check what I had seen. There, sat cross-legged, arms folded and with a fixed glare at whoever opened the door, was an adult gorilla.
What?
Well, you would scream. You're looking for a fish. That's not what you've got. The very old gorilla had sadly died, and as the college was now closed... Oh, no, it wasn't alive. It wasn't.
Wouldn't have read that out, would you?
How did it get in?
It was a dead gorilla. The very old gorilla had sadly died, and as the college was now closed for the weekend, all the shelves in the fridge had been removed, and the gorilla had been placed in there. Following my terrifying scream, there was a loud and raucous laughter from one of the nearby offices where my so-called colleagues were making their way through the keepers that day, subjecting each to this terrifying ordeal. So, of course, I joined in. So, dearly beloved and wise collective, I seek forgiveness not for my colleagues for scaring the living daylights out of me, not for all the rest of the keepers I then assisted with also scaring them witless, but for the now long-deceased elderly gorilla who didn't know that he was going to spend his final few hours scaring us highly trained zookeeping fraternity. Ed, the ex-zookeeper. Well, you would. I just think you would. If you're expecting an angelfish and you get a gorilla, that's pretty much the way it's going to go. What do you say, Sister
That
Rebecca?
was a very, very funny confession, and the image of this gorilla sitting in that rather macabre fridge was fantastic. So, no, I think it was a great confession, and the gorilla was obviously dead, so it wouldn't have minded.
Clear. No,
or
absolutely.
But it wouldn't have minded being, used to scare other
given that it was
zookeepers,
dead?
given that it was dead. It
No.
wouldn't have known it. So I don't think that any harm was done.
No, that's true.
It died of old age.
Yes.
You know, hopefully in its sleep.
Yes.
So I'm going to forgive.
Okay, that's very nice. All these caveats were put in. Yeah, what do you think there, Sister Bobby, from the Priory?
For a moment, though, she would have thought it was alive. I mean, he was sitting cross-legged, I assume with his eyes closed, could have been sleeping. So it was a great gag, but I felt just a little bit uncomfortable of just taking the mickey out of the gorilla. It just seems a little bit, I don't know,
Disrespectful.
Yes, it is.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
It does seem a little bit disrespectful,
Yes.
but a great gag nonetheless. So, but I think I'm going to have to forgive.
You are going to
Yeah.
forgive. Okay, let's see what Brother Matthew makes of this.
In that case, I mean, I have no problem with it at all being in the fridge. And in fact, I'm sure they had a conversation about what kind of position should we put this gorilla in. And I can think of a few positions that I would put it in that would not be just the crossed legs and the crossed arms.
what?
That would be other positions that would be actually much funnier.
What
Go
are you
on.
talking
It's an
about?
upright fridge.
It's an upright fridge, yes, but I reckon I could I'd use props where you get something in there with the
If you want to
with
write
the
to
gorilla.
Matt, his emails.
So yes, I think excellent stuff. All that story was lacking was a public school boy being thrown in with some
No, there were
crocodiles.
absolutely none of those.
So yes, I definitely forgive him.
Simon Mayo's Confessions podcast.
And that was your confession from the crypt this week. Always nice to hear, Sister Rebecca. And people doubted when this thing came in with the very young staff who work on the show. They said there wouldn't have been a confession with a gorilla in the fridge, would there? Yes.
Well, yes. I mean, it's a different kind of fridge, isn't it? That's why.
That's right. And a zookeeper. So
Yes.
therefore, he's all doing the right thing.
And from having listened to that again, there was obviously a confession that we'd had previous to that, the day before, from the same zookeeper.
Which is also worth repeating, actually, if anyone wants to say...
Is that the one where the posh boy falls in the... I think it is.
No, I think it involves a zoo transporter.
Okay.
Is it the fish one?
No. No. Is it the one with the elephant and the giraffe?
No, we haven't had an elephant or a giraffe one, have we? Yet?
It's the one where the rhino and the hippo get together
And love each other very much.
in a special way.
Going on a bear hunt. Yeah.
If you have a request for a vintage confession or you just made something up, as many details as you can so we can find it on our elaborate filing system, confessions@bbc.co.uk, and we'll do our best to find it. So, Sister Bobby, you forgave 2.5 this week, which takes your yearly tally to 24 forgives and 20.5 not.
How did I do a half? I can't remember that.
I don't know.
I think you did one of your even-handed...
on the one hand this.
On the one hand this, but
Matt
in a
forgave
way,
all 4, which takes you
obviously.
to 41 forgives and 5 not
Quite
forgives.
right too,
If
yeah.
you have something to get off your chest, it's confessions@bbc.co.uk. If you made it to the end of the last podcast, I ask you to tweet me the phrase "Ne mon saucisson for me, garçon." Again, amazing accents. Thanks to the haunted broadcast, Neris, Astrid Opeti, Paul Eagle, Scott Touquet, Philaf, Matt Maury, Tunza... It may well be that these are
Yes.
not French at all.
No.
Tunza Toei and all the others who tweeted precisely that. And as many people thought, this week's code phrase is indeed cornflakes in my cleavage! ! Don't forget you can hear the entire radio show every weekday from 5 on Radio 2. Thanks to Matt.
Oh, thank you.
Thanks to Bobby.
Thank you.
And it's time for a little bit of extra special sauce here. I've just noticed it says no jingle here, please, Simon. So
No jingle.
sorry about that. It just slipped out.
Well, is there a problem? We can still have the jingle there, can't we?
It says here quite clearly,
No
no
jingle.
jingle here, please,
Is this
Simon.
from the person who's ringing the bell?
Are you paying
screaming?
attention or
Well,
not?
Chloe fell down the trapdoor twice in the Today Show.
Dear.
The Confessions podcast. Go in peace.